Hello and welcome to this edition of Biblical Insights. We're going to talk about the Aaronic or the priestly blessing found in your Bibles at the end of Numbers chapter 6. We're going to proceed through this study in 5 stages. We're going to look at an old manuscript, and then we're going to look at some even older text. We're going to go way back in time just for fun. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the literary structure of the blessing. We're going to take some time just to appreciate the text as it's composed according to its meter in Hebrew. And then we're going to look at the verb barak, which means to bless, in one extra biblical source just for contrast, and then jump into the verb barak in the Hebrew Bible and see the different ways it's used. And then we're going to draw some theological conclusions. So lots to talk about in this video. Let's begin with stage 1, where we go back about 1,000 years to a codex. This is a manuscript of the Hebrew Bible called Leningrad Codex, okay, or Codex Leningradensis. All right, so because we live in a wonderful age for biblical studies, we can look at this on our screens together. So here you have the Codex Leningradensis. Again, we're talking about 1,000 years old. Some poor scribe or group of scribes wrote out every letter and every vocalization. Now, you may say, okay, how do we know that we're in the right codex? I mean, I see this old-looking book in front of me. Well, the academic designation for Codex Leningradensis is B19A. So if we just open up the codex, of course, from the left to the right, because it's Hebrew, we can just open up a couple of pages, and we see right here B19A. Okay, so we know that we're in the right codex. Now, what I'm going to do is jump forward in this codex to Numbers chapter 6, and we're actually going to read the Aaronic blessing, or the priestly blessing, from this ancient manuscript, line by line, and translate it, and then we're going to go back in time a lot further. So let's jump to Numbers chapter 6 in Codex Leningradensis, and we just flip through until here we are. Right here is the Aaronic blessing. Now I'm going to zoom in for you. Okay, let's read every line, and as we go through these lines, I'll just mark them with a dot so you can keep track. Yeverechecha Yahweh vayeshmerecha. The Lord bless you and keep you. Ya'er Yahweh panav elecha v'yichuneka. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. Yisa Yahweh panav elecha v'yasem lacha shalom. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Now, this is only about 1,000 years back in time, but let's go back, and this is mind-boggling. 2,600 years. Okay, in the 80s, there was a discovery made at Ketef Hinnom, and these are the Ketef Hinnom scrolls. Okay, I just pulled a couple of images off of Google that you can look at. You see, they're referred to here as amulets, but because these would have been worn, they were actually, it's hard to get a scale for the size or an idea of the size, but they're referred to as cigarettes. They were rolled up about the size of a cigarette, so quite small. You could actually carry them with you, wear them on your person. Here's another picture. This is apparently from the Israel Museum. I've never been there, but I would like to go. And you see that you have 2 scrolls, one larger and one smaller scroll. And then here's more of a close-up view where you can see this text. Now, the text that you see here doesn't look like what you just saw in Codex Leningradensis, and that's because this is Old Hebrew. Remember, this is about 2,600 years ago. So scribes would have taken books of the Old Testament that were written in this Old Hebrew script prior to the exile, and then during the exile, under the influence of Aramaic, they would have converted these ancient manuscripts into the more updated, as a relative term, into the more updated script that we see in, like I said, Codex Leningradensis, or what you'll see in the digitized version on your screen throughout this study. So we can be thankful to those scribes for all of their hard work. That way modern students of the Hebrew Bible don't have to learn this old Hebrew script as well. Now, there were a couple of scrolls that you saw in those pictures, and there are 2 versions of the Aaronic blessing that were written on these amulets. And I have a comparison for you. The first amulet had the full version of the Aaronic blessing, which is a very good match to the Masoretic text. But the smaller one dropped out what you see here in parentheses. Okay, so it just has what I have in bold. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and give you peace. And this is the smaller scroll with the second and third blessings combined. Now, this is a very well-known formulaic blessing. And so why would a scribe do this? Well, there could be a very practical answer to that. Now, if you remember, there were two scrolls. You see on this picture, one is large and one is small. It may be that the abbreviated version that we saw is just because it had to be that way. In the modern world, we would have, if I said, write down the Aaronic blessing, and you said, well, I don't have enough paper. Okay, I'll just give you another sheet of paper. But in the ancient world, writing materials were more limited and more expensive. It may very well be that the abbreviated form of the blessing was required by the availability of the writing material that they had. So we've gone back about 2,600 years in time. Let's step back forward a little bit. We're going to look at the digital version of the Aaronic blessing now. And what we're going to do is analyze the literary structure of the blessing. And throughout this analysis, you may get the impression that the blessing has been very carefully composed. So let's take a look at its literary structure. So you can see in the diagram here I have divine speech, and you can see how it sort of brackets human speech. It begins with divine speech and then ends with God's endorsement. And so these are the words that the priest are to say. Now, this is going to be very important later, so just keep that in mind for now. When we look at the consonants in Hebrew, we find that they build symmetrically, and they build towards this word peace, or shalom in Hebrew, the word that everybody knows. And so we see that in Hebrew, the consonants are 15, 20, and 25 respectively, so they build by a value of 5. When we look at the meter, or the stressed syllables, we find that they are 3, 5, and 7. So once again, you can see a symmetric build as it rises to a crescendo. And you also have the syllable count building similarly with 12, 14, and 16 syllables. Some scholars have also noted that if you remove the thrice repeated divine name, you're left with 12 words, which may symbolize the 12 tribes of Israel. Each line has the Lord as its subject, followed by 2 verbs. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. So there's a lot to take away from how the blessing is composed, its literary structure, as well as its focus on the divine name, both divine name, Yahweh, as it's repeated so many times, as well as divine speech, how the blessing itself is bracketed by the words of God. Now, we're going to take sort of a side road here and explore some scholarship that is out of date, but I think it's still a very interesting exercise and a way to explore the difference between divine speech and human speech in the Old Testament. I'm going to refer to an article by Anthony Thistleton, and the background here is that during the 30s there were 2 scholars who were publishing articles and so forth along the lines of how words were understood in the ancient Near East. And based on their work, there were scholars in the 40s, 50s, and 60s who built on it. And they would say things that sound very odd, and Thistleton is going to quote some of them here in his article. Edmund Jacob speaks of a projectile shot into the enemy camp. In Hebrew thought, the word appears as a material force, and again, a power-laden force which irresistibly achieves its end. And so scholars made much out of some biblical passages. We'll look at one of them in the context of blessing, but as well as the definition of word, devar, in Hebrew, because devar can mean word, matter, or thing. That's its typical translation value. And so these scholars would point to the meaning of the word devar, as well as some of these biblical passages, and say that this is the way that the ancients conceived of words. They were a material force. They didn't see a difference between the spoken word and substance. But Thistleton takes some issue with these scholars in his survey and his critique of this outdated scholarship. But let's look at one passage that these scholars would use. Then Isaac trembled very violently. This is after he's tricked by Jacob into giving the blessing to Jacob instead of Esau. Who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me, and I ate it all before you came, and I have blessed him? Yes, and he shall be blessed. And then again, I have made him Lord over you. What then can I do for you, my son? So once Isaac has given his blessing, once he has spoken these words, he can't take them back. It's like a missile that's launched. It goes to its target. It goes where you sent it, and that's it. There's nothing you can do about it. But Thistleton makes some very good points. He clarifies, but even if we leave theological beliefs in Israel out of account, we are still left with the concept of blessings and cursings as performative utterances which do things on the basis of conventional procedures in which the appropriate persons take part. They are effective because they are spoken by someone in authority and may often take the form of a performative utterance. But they no more depend on primitive notions of word magic than a modern judge and jury do when their words actually consign a man to prison or to freedom. But Thistleton, at the end of his article, points out something very interesting. The permanent value of this classic work by Grether and Durer, and these are the two scholars who began this sort of theory back in the 30s, is that they have collected examples of what words were thought to affect when behind them stood the authority of a god. Okay, and in the case of Israel, of course, God. And so now we're going to draw the line. Remember back to the diagram in the Aaronic blessing. We're going to draw the line between human speech and divine speech. Isaiah 55, "For as the rain and snow come down from heaven and do not return there, but water the earth, making it bring forth and sprout." Think again of that military weaponry analogy. As the missile goes forth, well, here, it's as the rain and snow come down from heaven and do not return there, but water the earth, making it bring forth and sprout, giving seed to the sower and bread to the eater. So shall my word be that goes out from my mouth. It shall not return to me empty, but it shall accomplish that which I purpose, and shall succeed in the thing for which I sent it. Now, Thistleton refers to this passage, and he says, is it the word that does not return empty because of Hebrew beliefs about the power of words in general? And we know the answer to that is no. Or because this particular word in question is spoken by Yahweh? If words in general could not return empty, the writer is saying little or nothing which is remarkable or even informative about God. Yet the whole emphasis of verses 6 through 11 is on Yahweh himself, dissenting from the usual understanding of word in this passage. Bowman comments, it is no hypostasis or remnant of a hypostasis that stands in the foreground, but it is Yahweh personally. The word that proceeds from Yahweh's mouth is no substance, but it is an effective and spoken word. This interpretation is entirely in accord with both the main point in Isaiah 55, 6 through 11, we read part of that above, and with the theology of God in chapters 40 through 55. Whereas all flesh is grass, and the grass withers and passes away, Yahweh's word will stand forever, a word that shall not return, because there is none besides me. I am God, and there is no other. So we can see in tracing this brief history of how the word is understood by scholars in the Old Testament, we can see that there's a clear distinction between the word of Yahweh, which operates as powerful, as meaningful, as forceful, because he himself is behind it, and the word of humans, which is powerful in their own cultural context, because they operate in various social convention. Now this brings up a question, and we have this diagram that shows how the Aaronic blessing is arranged with human speech surrounded by divine speech. If God's word is so powerful, then why use the word of the priests? Why does that even matter? Well, hold that question. We're going to look at how the verb barak is used in the Old Testament, and then we're going to circle back around to the theological aspect of the Aaronic blessing, and we'll answer that in time. So let's first begin with an example from Ugarit. Barak, the verb, is found once to kneel, 8 times meaning knee, and once meaning pull, and 13 times, and here's what I wanted to focus on, 13 times meaning to bless, with the nuances to give the power of the gods to a man. Now, is this how the verb is used in the Old Testament? No, it's not, but I thought that was an interesting contrast. It can be used as a greeting, a common greeting. As soon as he had finished offering the burnt offering, Samuel came, and Saul went out to meet him and greet him. So we see Barak, so it can be used as a greeting. It can be used between more official persons. Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was the priest of God Most High, and he, that is Melchizedek, blessed Abram, Barak. So we see a more formal usage. Of supreme importance for people in the ancient Near East, Isaac blesses Jacob and Moses blesses Israel. We read about Isaac's blessing of Jacob earlier in Genesis 27, and then we have Moses blessing Israel in Deuteronomy chapter 33. It can also be used in the sense of an exclamation of thanksgiving or joy, and we see this in the Psalms. Blessed are you, O Lord, teach me your statutes. Sometimes it occurs in a more formal setting. And he, Solomon, stood and blessed all the assembly of Israel. So Solomon's standing before the assembly. Okay, so he's standing and he's before the assembly. This is a formal setting. Aaron lifted up his hands toward the people and blessed them. Notice the posture. He lifted up his hands. Okay, we're in a more formal cultic setting. Cultic there referring to a setting of religious worship. So they shall put my name upon the people of Israel. Now we're back to our Numbers 6 passage, okay? Put my name on the people of Israel. This clues us in to the fact that we're in a more formal setting here for the Aaronic blessing in Numbers chapter 6. So we've set the stage for looking at the blessing. We've looked at the literary structure of the blessing. We've looked at the difference between human and divine speech, and we're going to look at that a little more now. And we've also posed a question. If God's speech is such a powerful thing because he himself is standing behind it, then what's the purpose of the human speech? Why do the priests give this blessing? Okay. Now, as we attempt to answer this question, at least one aspect of this question, I want you to keep in mind as we're drawing these theological conclusions, I want you to look for a specific trajectory, and that trajectory is God's closeness to his people. Okay. So these are some lengthy quotes, and I'll put them in a pinned comment for you, but I have in bold what I really want to focus on as we begin to answer this question and explore the closeness of God to his people and how all of this relates to human and divine speech in the priestly blessing. It is clear that such activity of God often appears as a wish formulated by people, and this also occurs in the cult. This phenomenon indicates a close association between God's blessing and human speech. God's activity can be actualized through human speech. It can be ignited by it. Okay, so notice, once again, a close association between the activity of God and human speech. Now, this may seem to go against what we've talked about earlier, where human speech is only powerful because it exists in its sort of social, convention, but just hang on to that thought. Deuteronomy especially emphasizes the close relationship between human action and divine blessing. Many texts demonstrate, therefore, that God's health-creating act can be in response to human deed and speech, the hearing of prayer, or the fulfillment of the blessing pronounced by the priest, and that brings us back to Numbers 6. But remember Thistleton's article, it's not human speech that's so powerful. It's simply God's close association with his people, and that he listens to them and he responds to them. He also watches them and he responds to them. There were numerous texts cited in those quotes that I gave you from those lexicons, but I pulled some of them out. Let's take a look. As for Ishmael, I, God, have heard you, Abram. Behold, I have blessed him. So God blesses Ishmael because Abram asked God to, and God listens. Look down from your holy habitation from heaven and bless your people Israel. Look down, God observes his people. And because you listen to these rules and keep and do them, God will love you and bless you. So there's a nearness of God to his people. He's intimately involved with what they're doing and what they're saying, and he responds to it. Now, having briefly explored the relationship between God and his people as it relates to the blessing, we return back to Numbers chapter 6. So they shall put my name upon the people of Israel, and I will bless them. We can cross-reference this with a similar phrase in Deuteronomy chapter 28, and all the peoples of the earth shall see that you are called by the name of the Lord. Now, both of these verbs imply ownership, and this cross-reference sort of helps us to figure this out. God's people can be called by his name. God can put his name on his people. This is ownership language. God's people belong to him. And God has given his people this blessing that is given by human priests. Remember, it's bracketed by divine speech, ensuring its validity. And it's an intricate reminder, as we saw through our literary analysis, of some very important theology. And that very important theology is that God listens to his people, in this case the priests, and he responds to them. God is near. And that's why he acts on behalf of what his people say and do. I hope this video has been a blessing to you. And I'll just say in conclusion, Yaverchecha Yahweh v'yishmerecha. The Lord bless you and keep you. I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.